In this video, I'm going to show you how to build a chat application using Angular 2 and socketIO. So this is the example application. Right now I have two windows open. They're both on localhost 8000. But every time I type a message, then it's going to get printed on the other screen. And the way that I'm doing this is I'm using WebSockets using socketIO. And I'm only using one web server, which is the nodemon server. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is open up two command prompts, and I'm going to cd into the location of the examples folder that we've been using. And I'm going to do that for my other terminal as well. And then what I'll do is I'll just start with the same repo that we've been using. So I'm just going to clone this repo right here, our Angular 2 boilerplate. And I'll hit enter. So it's cloning the repo. Okay, now I've opened up this ng2 boilerplate, and first thing is I'm going to change this to chat. So that is going to be the name of our folder. And I'm going to go into this, and I'm going to make a new folder inside of here, which is going to be called public. And inside of my public folder is where I'm going to hold all of my Angular assets as well as my index file. So I'm going to click index as well as my system.js config file, as well as my app folder. So I'm going to drag everything into this public folder. And now I'm going to drag this chat folder into my text editor. Now inside of my chat folder, I'm going to add a new file, which is going to be called server.js. This is going to hold our node server code. And I'm also going to make a new folder, which is going to be called server. And I'm going to leave this empty, but this is where you would put your controllers, models, all your API stuff. Now I'm going to switch into my package.json file. So we're going to be compiling our TypeScript code separate in a separate command prompt, and then running our nodemon server in another command prompt. So we're not going to be using this npm start command. We're only going to be using this tsc command. The next thing that I need to do is add in some dependencies for a node. So I'll just do this at the bottom here. And I'll just paste this in, get rid of this one. But you can see I'm including express, path, and socketIO. When we include socketIO in this way, it's going to bring down everything that we need for both the server as well as the client. And there's one more thing that I need to include here, and that's going to be our dependencies for gulp, as well as our TypeScript typings for socketIO on the client side. So this will give us enhanced error checking and methods for socketIO on the client. And then we're going to be adding gulp as well. So let's do that now actually. In our chat folder, I'm going to right click, hit new file, and we call this gulp file.js. So I'm going to copy in my gulp code right here, and all this is doing is this is going to copy over files and folders in our node modules into our public lib, and it will create this lib folder. And then when we run our server is going to look inside of our public folder. It'll find our index.html file, and then from there it's going to load up all of these front end files. But as you can see, it's pointing right now towards node modules, and there's no way that it can go up into the node modules from here. It doesn't work like that. So that's why we have to copy over these front end files. So we're copying over Angular, Bootstrap, socketIO, as well as RxJS. And since we're in here, since we're in this index file, I'm going to adjust this right now. So again, we're going to create this lib folder. So it's going to be lib, then the path stays the same for Bootstrap. Same thing with my styles. So these are actually, I can get rid of this, and it's just going to be lib. And you're going to see, so these individual files are being copied over in the gulp file, and they're located just at the root of the lib folder. And I'll show you that right now actually. So if we go down right here, you can see that we're copying over these files individually right here. Okay, so that should be good. I'm going to save my index file. Now go into my terminals, and the first thing I need to do is cd into chat. So I'll cd into my chat directory, and so I don't forget, I'll do this in my other terminal as well. From here, you can type either npm install or yarn. So I'll just type yarn, and this is going to bring down everything that I need. And while this is working, let's create a very simple server. Back over here, I'm going to close out my other tabs. I'm going to start out by requiring in the modules that I need. And I was using var, so I'm going to change these vars to consts and hitting replace all. Okay. I'm setting up a port to 8000 right here. And at the top here, I'm setting up an express server. And then I'm also setting it up to use socket.io right here. Now below this port, I'm going to set up a static path.join. So this is just saying, hey, look in our public folder in order to find our index file. Then at the bottom here, I'm going to say server.listen, and this right here is enough to start a node server. But I'm actually going to add just one more line of code right here. So inside of this io.connection is where we're going to add all of our events. So we'll be saying socket.on and socket.emit in order to communicate with our client. And when we make an initial connection, it's going to send a log message into our terminal saying new connection made. Back in our terminal, you can see that we've downloaded everything. And then I'm also going to type gulp. So let's see what happens. Now gulp is going to copy over all of those front-end files into a lib folder. And that's what it's doing right now. And this clean message just clears out any folders and files that were already in there. So now you can see, boom, we got this lib folder and we've got all of our front-end files. Okay, great. So one more thing that we do need to do is fix the system.js config file. So let's see if we can fix this. Instead of node modules, we're going to be pointing towards lib. Right here we have a comment for other libraries. And we are using socket.io, so we need to include that. So we're referencing socket.io for the client only. So in our lib, I've included the socket.io client, and we're going to be pointing to the socketio.js file. So we need to make sure that we include it in our packages right here. Okay, so now that should work. I'll save that. And now we need to compile our TypeScript files. So we'll open up this other terminal, and I'm just going to type tsc. Okay, that looks like it finished. And if we go into our app, we should see a bunch of JavaScript files that have been created, like we do. So now let's give our server a try. Let's see if I can just type nodemon server.js. You can also type node and then server.js. I'm using nodemon, and it needs to be installed globally. So you can type nodemon-g and it will bring it down globally. And this will just restart my server anytime changes are made. So we got this listening on port 8000. Let's refresh this. Okay, we get welcome to the home component. Okay, great. So now let's get to work changing this more into our chat application. Okay, so within my connection, this is within my socket.io connection. I'm going to paste in some code here, and this is for some test messages. So this is just to communicate back and forth from the server to the client. And what we're doing is we're saying, socket.io, listen for an event called event1 coming from the client. Take the data that was sent to you, and then print that data to the console. So this socket.emit is saying, emit a message the second that you hear from a new browser. So the second that we load up a browser window, it's going to send this message that's called, it has a name, it's called event2, and this includes an object with a key of message and a value of server to client, do you read me over. Okay, then on event 3, we'll say, when you receive this event 3, print it to the console, and then also send back a new event called event4 with a payload of message loud and clear. And one thing I want to do quick is get rid of all these JavaScript files so I don't see them. So in my project, I can go to edit project. Because what I can do is I can just copy over this file excludes. And then since I have a new folder, I have to, I guess, put it right here. Okay. I'll just put it right there, save that. So let's start by opening up our home component file. So normally you want to abstract away the socketIO client communications into a service. But I want to get everything up and running and test it out to make sure it works before we do that. Okay, so the first thing to do is we're going to import star, which is a wildcard, as IO from socketIO client. Okay, so this is using the library that we defined in our system.js file. I'm going to add a CSS file here. So under home, I'm going to add a new file. So this is going to be called home.styles.css. And I'll just put this right below our selector. So now we're referencing the style sheet so I can use it later. Okay, we've already required an init. So down here, I'm just going to say implements on init, just like that. So we'll just say ng on init. So right at the top of my class here, I'm going to define my socket, which is going to be of type, and it comes right up, right? So socketIO client is what we're looking for. And then I need to also attach our socket. So just like that, it comes up really beautiful because we included our types. And now inside of the constructor, I need to enable our socketIO client. I'm going to use the socket that we just defined as this.socket equals io.connect. And that's it. We've now connected our socketIO client to communicate with our socketIO server. Okay, now within my ng on init, I'm just going to paste this code in and then walk you through it. So uncomment this. So all we're doing is we're using our socket, and then just like we did on the server, we're emitting events, and then we're listening for events to happen. So for this event 1, we're going to immediately send a message to the server with the payload. Client to server, can you hear me server? And then we'll get back event 2 from the server, and then we'll send event 3 to the server. And then we'll also listen for event 4 down here, again, coming from the server. So you should see that these pretty much match up, right? Okay, so let's save that. Now I'm actually going to kill my server. If I didn't kill my server and I just recompiled my TypeScript files, I'd get a whole bunch of messages here. Kill the server. Now I'll recompile my TypeScript. Now I'm going to go out here and restart my server. Okay, perfect. I got these connections, right? I got my new connection made. My client to server, can you hear me? Yes, it's working. And then same thing on the client. Server to client, do you read me over? Loud and clear. Okay, so we got socketIO up and running. And let's open up another browser tab for good measure. Okay, see, we get these messages all over again. Okay, great. Okay, now the next step. We got everything working, but we don't want all this in our component file. We need a way to abstract it so that we can use it in other files. So let's do this inside of my shared folder. So inside of my shared folder, create a new file. And let's go ahead and call this socket.service.ts. Okay, so right at the top here, the first thing that I need to do is import injectable from Angular core. And the same thing, import the wildcard as IO from socketIO client. Then below that, I need to declare at injectable. Then I'll say export class. And I'm going to name this socket service. And I'm just going to copy this over from my home component. So here, I'm going to just copy this over. Just like that. Okay, now time to copy over some more code. So inside of the service, I've declared 3 methods. on emit and remove listener. These do the same thing as what we were doing in the home component. We're just abstracting away the logic of sending and receiving messages. And I actually want to show you something really interesting real quick. So I'm going to bring this over. So this is the socket server that I use for Angular version 1. And what I wanted to show you here is these methods are basically identical, these on and emit methods, except we're using root scope. So in Angular 1, we had to connect to the root scope in order to use socket.io, which was really bad practice. You're basically not supposed to use root scope unless you absolutely had to. In Angular 2, we don't have to do that. And the reason is because we're using zone.js. So when using zone.js, we're able to connect to more of the HTTP methods that are coming directly through. So change detection works in a completely different and better way in Angular 2. Now let's go back into our home component. Okay, so first things first, I will import my socket service and get rid of this. Okay, now actually before we forget, let's make sure that we add this to our app module file. So in app module ts, I will add my import statement right below here. Then make sure that I add this to my list of providers down below. Paste that in. Now let's go back in here, and I don't need to connect to my socket anymore, so that's cool. And I don't need to define this socket right here either. What I do need to do is connect to the socket service, right? So inside of my constructor, I'll just declare a private variable method of underscore socket service is of type socket service. And then just to test this out real quick, I'm going to replace this .socket with my service. And we'll just replace all these this.sockets with my underscore socket service. Okay, that looks good. I'll save that. And again, we gotta kill our server and recompile our TypeScript code. Oh, and see, we get some errors here. I need to obviously say this dot. Yes, I do. And I just need to say this dot. Okay, that looks better. We'll save that. Let's try one more time. Okay, looks good. Let's restart our server. Listening on port 8000. I already have some windows open, so we're getting connections. Let's close this one and just refresh this. And we get the same connections, meaning our service has been correctly implemented. Now let's go ahead and add in our chat messaging into our application. Okay, so for this part, I'm going to have you copy over the styles as well as part of our HTML. So this will be provided to you. So I would say just copy this over, and I'm actually using this from this GitHub repo right here. So go ahead and open this up. And I'm only using just the styles and some of the HTML to make it kind of look like this. So I'll save that, and let's open up our HTML file. Okay, so I'll put this right below. I'll paste this in. So this is all HTML that's going to be provided to you. And I've left out a couple things like our for loop and our submit message method, which we'll add in now. So let's go up to the top here. So the first thing that I'll do is right under this message container. So right where this message row container is, this is where I'm going to paste in my for loop. So this is where we're going to be iterating and displaying all of our messages. Now below here, we're hiding and showing classes depending on whether self-authored is set to true. Okay, and then we have a couple of places for the message itself, for the message username, as well as a timestamp, and then also a image URL. Okay. Right here is where our form is. So right here is where I'm going to add our submit method. So when we click a button, we'll send in this method, which is going to carry a payload. And finally, right here, I'm also going to add in our ng model directive so that we can catch the message text. And now let's open up our component.ts file. So at the top here, I'll define a few properties. The first is going to be the message text, which is going to be of type string. Next, we're going to have our messages, right, which is going to be of type array. So we'll have an array of messages, and that's just going to be an array of any. So inside of this ng on init is where we're going to receive the messages coming from the server. So when somebody sends a message, it's going to be picked up by the server and then sent back to us. Okay, so I can get rid of this. So in order to display those messages that we're getting back, I need to set those messages to a new array. Okay, then below that we'll say this dot underscore socket service dot on. So when we receive from the server the event called message received, we're going to take that. So this MSG is of type any and represents the object that we get back from the server, which includes the message itself and maybe the username and maybe the image URL of the author. Okay, so this is a function, so we're using this arrow function or lambda, just like that. And then I can say this dot messages dot push the message. And just so we can see what's coming out, I'm going to log the message. And I'm also going to log the entire array of messages. Now let's go ahead and define our send message method. So when we click that send message button, so when we click this button, it's going to submit the send message method. So first we'll define a constant of message, and this is going to be used to send within our socket service. Okay, so for now we're just going to send back a message with a key of text, and it's set equal to message text. So this message text right here is what we've submitted right here. So here we'll say this dot underscore socket service dot emit. So we're going to send this to the server, and the name of this is send dash message, and we're going to send with it the message object right here. So this is this. That's it. And for good measure, we'll just clear out the message text field. So we're just going to set it to empty. So I'm just going to replace these text messages. Here you go. So here's our socket.on send message. So when we receive the send message, we're going to log out data.text. So this can be whatever you want. I'm just calling it data. You can call it message, event, result, anything, but you can see we're using this dot text, right? So this dot text is this right here. So it all makes sense. When we get it back, we're going to log that out, and then we're going to send it back to the client with the event called message received plus the payload. And then this message received is going to be pushed right here, and it's going to show up in our list of messages. Okay, so let's hit save all. Let's make sure that I kill my server. Go ahead and recompile my TypeScript code. Okay, now let's go ahead and restart our server. Let's refresh this page. Okay, we get this little chat box. Let's type a message, say hi. Okay, and all we get is this hi right here, which is all that we should get. So now I've got one more window open, and I'm just going to type sup. So you can see I get my sup in this browser window, and I get it over here as well. Okay, great. So everything is up and running. One more really quick thing, just to expand this just a little bit more, is I'm going to add our timestamp and an avatar. So we can do that real easily. I'm going to use this image URL as well as this date. So back in our home component, let's go up here and let's create a new property. And I'm just going to copy this over. Now you can use whatever avatar, location, or API that you want to use. This is just one that I found, and this is adorable.io, which allows you to grab different avatars, and then this is the size of the avatar, so it's 30 pixels, okay? And we're just going to display it in our message. One other thing that I'm going to add here is self-authored to false. So in a home template right here, we're saying if self-authored is set to true, then display this style, this chat message style, which is in your style sheet. If self-authored is set to false, then display this chat message received style. Now what I can do is I can add a couple more properties to our message. So we'll first add a date property, which we can use the JavaScript date method of date.now. And I can set my image URL to what we just defined above, which is this.avatar. I'm going to save this and recompile our code. Go back, restart our server. Now let's go ahead and refresh these. So refresh that and that. Add a message here, and you can see I get my sent at with my timestamp, and you could fix this a little bit. You can move this over, and I'll add this over here. Now you can see that we're getting the timestamp as well as our little avatar. Okay, so this project was all about how to create an Angular application with a Node.js server and integrate socket.io to create a simple chat application that communicates between unlimited number of browser instances.